heart of the coronavirus outbreak. Everybody's told you need to go into quarantine. You can't be exposed to others for several weeks.
More than 2,000 dead, tens of thousands infected. Rising anger over how the crisis is being handled.
Local officials in Wuhan did withhold information. The doctors in Wuhan who were talking about it were explicitly told to shut up.
And scientists racing to find a vaccine.
We just don't know how this outbreak is going to develop or how many people are ultimately going to be infected or are ultimately going to die from this disease.
Tonight on Four Corners, how the coronavirus outbreak sparked a global emergency.
I'm absolutely fucking petrified. The police are actually knocking on doors and taking temperatures, and if people have got a temperature, they're dragging them out. You don't get a fucking say in it. You don't get an option.
It's just blood, darling.
Wuhan is a very, very beautiful, charming and bustling city in central China. It sits on the banks of Yangtze River. It's a mega city. Wuhan is also home to the second most number of universities in China. People around the world come to Wuhan to study.
It's right in the heart of the country, geographically as well as economically. All these trains and planes are coming through there, and to have the virus outbreak start there, it's almost like if you wanted to pick the worst place for it to break out in, that would be the place you'd release it.
In early December, people in Wuhan begin falling ill with a mystery virus.
First infections in Wuhan started in early December, and I believe the first case in December the 1st. When a new infectious disease appears, it does take a little time to register and become aware that it's new. So there were people presenting with a form of pneumonia.
Local doctors suspect the virus originated in the city's seafood and wildlife market.
So we think the virus probably originated from bats because that's what the genetic data tell us, but often there's an intermediary animal host. In this case, they think pangolins might be implicated, which are a mammal, and that intermediary animal host might have been at the markets. We don't think that it's from eating those things specifically through the gastrointestinal, but more from the handling of the contaminated meat. Somewhere in that market, we believe there must have been a contaminated animal source that infected the first cluster of humans.
In late December, as the number of cases increases, doctors in Wuhan begin sharing information in a private chat group.
Well before any of us knew about the coronavirus, there were people who tried to sound the alarm. So there were a group of whistleblowers who'd heard that there was this virus cluster, and they started speaking about it. Now, in particular, there was one doctor, Li Wenliang. He posted on a chat group with his former university classmates that people had been coming in with what he thought was the SARS virus.
7 SARS cases were confirmed in the Huanan seafood market. The main mode of transmission of the virus is droplet transmission at close range, or contact with respiratory secretions of patients. This can cause a special pneumonia that is evidently contagious and capable of affecting multiple organ systems. It is also called SARS.
Yourself!
Patients are isolated in the emergency department of a hospital. Everyone please be careful. SARS is
The outbreak revived the spectre of SARS, another type of coronavirus, which killed 774 people in 2002 and 2003.
The reason why they would have been so concerned at the prospect is this was SARS was threefold. First of all, SARS was super infectious. Second, it had a relatively high mortality rate of 10%. And third, a large number of health actually died of SARS because of the complexity of the stopping the transmission. And I think that was the real concern.
Stand strong!
On the same day as Dr. Lee's warning, the Wuhan Health Commission sends an urgent internal notice to hospitals on the treatment of pneumonia of unknown cause.
Some medical institutions in our city have seen patients steadily with pneumonia of unknown cause. If you find patients with unexplained pneumonia, actively adjust the resources and treat them on the spot.
The notice warns them to keep the outbreak quiet.
Without authorization, no unit or individual shall release treatment-related information to the outside. I have no doubt that local governments have reported the situation to the central government. So local governments were not accountable to the people at that time. They adopted the policy of concealing the truth from the public but starting to control the epidemic internally. This contradiction prevented them from properly mobilizing to deal with the spread of the epidemic.
I don't carry change.
Dr. Lee and the other doctors continue to share information.
Be careful. The WeChat group of our class has been banned. The latest news of the coronavirus infection has been confirmed. The virus classification is in progress. Please don't spread the word and ask your family and loved ones to take precautions.
Do not go to the Huanan Seafood Market in the near future.
So when this group of doctors, I think they're university classmates from Wuhan, began sharing the information they had about a strange new virus on this sort of joint WeChat group, they were doing what you'd expect medical professions to do, to try and sort of pool information and see what was actually happening. But of course, that's a kind of dangerous thing to do in China. I think there's a little doubt right now that local officials in Wuhan did withhold information. They've admitted as much. The doctors in Wuhan who were talking about it were explicitly told to shut up.
Dr. Lee and his colleagues are hauled in for questioning by Wuhan police.
After investigation and verification,
Brighter than before!
8 defendants have been summoned and handled according to law. The police will investigate and punish with zero tolerance those illegal acts that fabricate and spread rumors and disrupt social order.
Dr. Lee was disciplined by his own hospital. He was even picked up by the police and taken in and castigated.
Shine with me!
And told not to spread rumors. This is what happens when you are saying things publicly that the Communist Party doesn't like. You're spreading rumors.
Never back down from what you believe. This is my choice.
If somebody is trying to
shine with me.
Tell the world
this
about
is my choice.
A potentially dangerous virus, the first instinct is to shut them up.
Despite the risk of retribution, critics like Dr. Lee Shan, already lost his university job for defying a ban by President Xi on teaching democracy, continue to speak out over the government's handling of the crisis.
They were basically concealing the truth. Although internal controls were in place, the information kept from the public caused the outbreak of the disaster and the spread of the disease.
That's the key point in this saga. You know, they lost about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, just when the virus was at its sort of nascent point, just at a time where they could have traced it, just at a time where perhaps they could have checked it more substantially. But that was lost because it got caught up in the politics of the information flow and information surveillance in China.
4 weeks after the first infections, China notifies the World Health Organization of the outbreak. Things are about to get worse. In early January, millions of Chinese are preparing to travel to and from Wuhan to celebrate Chinese New Year with their families.
if you were to pick the most dangerous time, the worst time for a virus to break out here, the worst time for it to spread quickly across China and even around the world, it would be the Lunar New Year. You have hundreds of millions of people crisscrossing China, travelling overseas, and because of that mass migration, the largest mass migration annually in the world, I mean, it was just a terrible time for this virus outbreak to happen.
Australian resident Ying Wang, who lives in Melbourne, is preparing to visit Wuhan with her husband and 2 children when she hears about the outbreak.
It was a couple of days after our Christmas holiday in Melbourne. I got a video sent over from my cousin in Wuhan, and according to the video, there was suspected SARS-like pneumonia. And I asked my cousin, should I cancel my trip? We waited until probably the first week in January, and then there was an official announcement from our local government back in Wuhan saying that the disease was controllable, and then it sort of I feel relieved. So we went out with our trip.
Ying Wang and her family arrive in Wuhan on January 9. That same day, a 61-year-old man who had visited the seafood market becomes the first person to die of coronavirus. His death is kept quiet for 2 days.
During the most crucial time of the spread of disease in early Jan, Wuhan and Hubei were holding annual political meetings. As a result, the first date, which occurred on January 9, was not announced until January 11. After January 11, the data on deaths and confirmed cases plateaued and the number did not change at all. I believe that the local authorities concealed the truth from the public due to political concerns.
On January 22, the government finally acknowledges the gravity of the situation at a press conference in Beijing.
病毒存在变异的可能，疫情存在着进一步扩大的风险。当前政治催运、人员流动性激增，客观上加大了疫情传播的风险和防控的难度，绝不能掉以轻心，要高度警惕。
9 people have died and 440 people are confirmed to have contracted a mysterious coronavirus as China works to stop it spreading during the Lunar New Year travel rush.
It was 22nd of January. That was the turning point. It was Wednesday, and just bad news started coming in. Started with the Chinese official news saying that it's getting much worse than they expected, and then all of a sudden, I think it was the next day, 23rd. I remember I woke up quite late, like 10 a.m. and suddenly, my dad just told me, "Oh, we can't go out now. We can't go out. We can't get out of our apartment."
There's been a dramatic development this morning in the Chinese city of Wuhan, which is the epicenter of an outbreak of a deadly new virus. All public transport, buses, trains, ferries, and shut down as authorities scramble to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
I mean, when the authorities decided to lock down that whole province of Hubei, that's like locking down the entire population of Italy and telling them you can't leave that province.
Here we go!
It was really the moment when everybody knew, all right, this is a big problem.
When Wuhan went into lockdown, I think January the 23rd, and then flights and greater lockdown measures across China. This is unprecedented in the history of modern medicine. We've never tried. We know that containment can work, but it's never really been done at this large scale.
The day I learned that Wuhan was in lockdown, I felt quite shocked, and I immediately started worrying about food supply, and I had to stop everything on a day. Just started messaging everybody to find out, is that really the official news? How serious is this announcement?
By late January, Wuhan's hospitals are struggling to cope. And medical staff are under intolerable pressure.
Just you and me, Fishbones.
With patient numbers surging, construction begins on 2 new hospitals, with one scheduled to open in just over a week.
Even though
Not at all.
effectively shut down several cities, the World Health Organization says it's not yet a global health emergency.
Fly away while you can!
So obviously the whole world was watching very closely through January as this epidemic unfolded, and people were very concerned. A lot of experts were concerned and felt that the public emergency of international concern should have been declared earlier. I think people were harking back to Ebola and delays that might have been very costly in terms of the ability to save people's lives.
Australia's first case of coronavirus has been confirmed in Victoria as New South Wales announces it has 2 probable cases.
I'd never keep my guests waiting.
So the minute we made the diagnosis of the first case in Australia, we knew how significant that was, and we knew that we wanted to culture the virus.
In a major breakthrough, Australian scientists become the first outside China to isolate the virus in a laboratory. CSIRO scientists have been growing the
trap is set.
Highest security laboratory, reserved for the most deadly pathogens.
We don't actually know how dangerous this virus is. We know it kills people, but we don't know how many, and we don't know exactly what the mechanism is by which this virus kills people. So at the moment we're taking the highest level of precautions.
I helped build this empire.
Because it's very stressful. Imagine you're actually working with such high volatile agents.
The most important thing that we're doing at the moment is growing the virus to produce more of it so that we can understand the characteristics of this virus and also how it behaves in our biological model so that we can see the progress of the disease.
So we will then introduce the virus into our test animals, on this occasion ferrets, because they're...
I've embarrassed fools twice your size.
The idea is
整个地球还能找出第二个国家、第二个政府像这个样子搞吗？武汉市
Dó seu pato!
一样，看到他们倒地死亡，或者说各种情况。
Tá vivo, Zelo. É. Vitor.
初一啊，本来是一个非常高兴喜气的日子，这个时间段，但是眼下你觉得我们武汉人民，或者说一个中国人，能高兴得起来吗？
Já voltaste, Márcio?
The more than 900 million Chinese citizens who are equipped with smartphones have been extremely dissatisfied with the situation of Wuhan pneumonia in the past 1 month or so. From my own observation, this level of dissatisfaction is unprecedented in the past 8 years. They have been tremendously dissatisfied with Wuhan local government's ineffectiveness in epidemic and disaster response. The predicament the Wuhan people have been put in, paralysis of the local medical institution, and too much risk there to face.
As authorities desperately try to stop the virus spreading, Wuhan is effectively cut off from the rest of China.
We decided to go into Hubei province to have a look what it was like right inside the virus hot zone. As we got closer and closer to Hubei, the roadblocks were becoming more serious, and in fact looked like something out of an apocalyptic movie. The police are making all the cars pull over to the side.
Oi.
Reporting in?
So, basically, that's the border that way. The police have told us that we can drive in, but we can't drive out.
We drove through a series of ghost towns. I mean, nobody on the streets, shops closed, the shutters were down. And this is during Spring Festival. Normally, this is a time when you'd have fireworks, families, friends gathering to have meals together, celebrating, being happy, and instead it was completely dead, and in fact pretty eerie.
The outbreak of the coronavirus in China has finally been declared a global health emergency after a rapid escalation in the number of infections. during the past week. There are almost 8,000 cases in 18 countries, including 9 in Australia.
So here I am, sitting in reporting from where I live. That's because after returning from Hubei province, at the heart of the coronavirus outbreak, everybody's told you need to go into quarantine. You can't be exposed to others for several weeks. This city, Beijing, if I look out the window, it's dead. I mean, there are hardly any people in the streets. Friends here don't want to go outdoors. That's because they're afraid of catching the coronavirus. And the same is happening all over the country, all these mega cities in China.
The government is taking
De
drastic
fusillade.
action to stem the coronavirus. Foreign nationals coming from China are now banned from entering the country.
I think from a disease control point of view, we want to continue these for as long as is feasible. There's just so many major economic consequences of the travel ban that I think at some point we'll have to make the decision to lift the bans. But if we can keep them going as long as possible, that will be beneficial from a disease control point of view.
Hundreds of Australians remain trapped in Hubei province.
This is a view from my window. and it's been really good weather today, but we're not going out. And this is our central garden at level 6, so it's a bit shame that we're stuck at home. Otherwise, it could be a really good day out.
I really just want a more firm answer from anywhere, really, from WHO or my local government. So how bad really is? I'm still having this question. How serious is this whole pandemic? Even though every day we watch the numbers, infected number of people, also the death toll keep going up. Just, yeah, I need to, I don't know. I need somebody to assure me this is, I don't know, it's like the end of the world.
Morning, folks. It's Thursday, the 6th of February. Middle of a ghost town here. 1.3 million people all hiding. It's raining. It's a miserable day. Death tolls were like 545 today. 16,800 people in hospital in my district. Where you can beef up to give us an answer about trying to get out of here.
Australian Tim McLean is stranded on the outskirts of Wuhan. He's trying to get his Chinese partner a visa to come to Australia.
Foreign Affairs just contacted me. I just hung up the phone.
Do they need our help?
They just confirmed and wanted to let me know that my spouse, Xu Shong, didn't make the list for the flight with Qantas, and asked me if I was still interested in leaving. I informed them that I'm not leaving without her.
Help is underway.
It's dire here. It's very dire. There's queues outside the hospitals now. There's people dropping on the footpath, literally. Okay? I know how bad it is. I can't wait to get out of here. It's terrible. This has been spraying right outside our front door. They've been doing this all through the city regularly. The local council have been going out and spraying disinfectant around everybody's doorways. So I suspect they're spraying to stop infections coming out of the sewer. I better go in and shut the door. I've seen medical folks turn up 2 doors away from me, 20 metres from my front door, and take a lady away that was infected. They also took her son. The son returned home 24 hours later. He was okay. We haven't seen or heard of the lady since.
So people have been concerned about the human rights aspects of quarantine and isolation of cases, quarantine of contacts, etc., and that's been happening on a very large scale in China, but also in Australia and other countries. From a disease control point of view, putting from a disease control point of view, that works.
Videos emerge on social media of authorities using increasingly drastic measures.
强行啊，一家4口啊。
每天不是不允许谈，允许谈。It was right on my tail.
Around China, residents post scenes claiming officials are welding the doors of apartment buildings shut so people can't get out.
那个是门吗？才敢那门哦！
把门封的了。你看那个电焊工在那块焊的，那中间是一个门，你看，可怕。
把门洞都焊死了，不让出屋了。下一个就是我们6号楼了，就是我家了。
I'm very concerned about getting this virus. I'm not even 100 metres away from one of the hospitals that's full. I've seen people entering that hospital. I've seen people getting rolled out on stretchers out of that hospital. It's literally across the road from where I come out of my apartment.
Bar the doors!
That's concerning.
You've come from me.
My hospitals here are full. We run out of medical supplies here. There's no PPE or personal protective equipment available anymore, so the doctors are all gone to the bigger hospitals.
Be grateful
They're shipping out sick and the people that are in bad condition, they're taking them to Wuhan. The Wuhan hospitals are also full now.
By early February, the virus is in 25 countries, with 216 cases outside China.
The most likely way that the virus is travelling outside of China is by infected people. So these people, they are perhaps in the early stages of the disease and perhaps not showing very many clinical signs. So they are able to get onto planes and are quite happy to travel. And in all innocence, they are spreading the disease as they travel.
Believe me! 10% or less of all infections in China are being detected at the current time. We estimate that maybe up to 50,000 new infections a day occurring in China, which is obviously much larger than the official case numbers.
They'll come for you!
Almost 4,000 passengers, including more than 200 Australians, have spent their first 24 hours officially in quarantine on board a cruise ship off Japan. They'll be isolated on board for the next fortnight, with some passengers growing anxious as their crucial medicines are beginning to run out.
These stories were true!
We know that cruise ships are at high risk for outbreaks. It's well documented that you get outbreaks of influenza, norovirus, destro, and so on cruise ships. They are closed, small communities in a small space compared to, say, a country. So obviously you can get more intense transmission once an outbreak starts.
Shocking news breaks that the man who had first warned of the outbreak has died of coronavirus.
In China, censors are working overtime to contain an outpouring of anger and grief over the death of the doctor who blew the whistle on the coronavirus crisis. Li Wenliang died from the virus in a Wuhan hospital 5 weeks after being punished by authorities for warning others of a dangerous new virus.
And burn!
There was a huge outpouring of grief, anger, frustration on Chinese social media, not just from so-called netizens, on Chinese-style Reddit forums or something, but from the Supreme Court of China, who put out a statement saying that, these doctors are heroes.
Eternal winter!
The public intellectuals and the public both realized that Dr. Li represents the conscience of China. He was suppressed from the beginning from telling the truth. He could have saved the livelihood of tens of thousands of people, or thousands of people's lives. But all this was concealed due to the authority's suppression of free speech. I believe the public expressed their dissatisfaction with the government by commemorating him.
The death toll reaches a critical milestone, overtaking the numbers killed by SARS.
I've been hiding my light too long!
Our strength is yours!
3具尸体已经在这里躺了一个上午，有的人已经是凌晨死的，到现在没有人来。
Illuminate the enemy!
然后医生、护士还有病人全部都在这种环境下面工作。
习近平首先来到北京市朝阳区安贞街道安华里社区。
After being conspicuously absent, President Xi emerges on state media to assert his authority.
Stand and defend! Avenge me!
Xi has really lost control of the narrative, and he's struggling to get it back. Now, if that goes on, if they don't get on top of the virus, then that can really damage Xi's image, I think, even with ordinary Chinese people, and that has potentially profound implications because 2-3 years down the track, when he's meant to be reappointed, maybe his enemies will use this against him.
So the people directed this kind of dissatisfaction directly to Xi himself and Xi's style of governance, which is, I believe, the most serious threat to Xi Jinping. This is because the foundation of his power is based largely on populism, and the loss of this populist foundation will undoubtedly destabilize his position in the party.
Australians still trapped in the coronavirus epicenter in China are tonight preparing for a second attempt at an evacuation flight to Darwin.
There is a seat available for my partner Sean and myself on the next available flight out of Wuhan, which apparently is leaving at midnight tonight. We've got 3 or 4 hours to get to the airport. They've sent us all our passes, etc., so we can get through the checkpoints. It's all confirmed. We've got the emails, we've got the thumbs up, so we're out of here. We're heading home. Can't wait, and super excited.
So today is our last day in Wuhan. It's been pretty long journey, really. In the past 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, we've been house quarantined for more than 2 weeks. So tomorrow we're going to get out and go to the airport and come back to Australia. So it's still unreal for me. Reaching the airport toll gate, so it looks like we're going through a checkpoint. It's 2:30, kids are not asleep. I'm super tired. We're still waiting about half of the plane, still waiting to be cleared of security and passport control and stuff. A lot of paperwork, a lot of screening, a lot of questions. Just very, very stressful, really.
Out of here.
Yes, we're out of here. Going home.
Tim McLean isn't on the flight. Quarantine restrictions mean he hasn't been able to get any transport to the airport, so he's still stuck in Hubei province.
I'm absolutely fucking petrified now. 1,300 odd people are dead here. The police are actually knocking on doors and taking temperatures, and if people have got a temperature, they're dragging them out, mate. You don't get a fucking say in it. You don't get an option. You get taken away and put with a bunch of other sick people. Not only are we in quarantine, but it's beyond quarantine now. I don't even know what to call it. It's quite terrifying knowing that people can knock on your door here and just drag you out for no reason at all because of no temperature.
At the moment, we don't have a good understanding of the real mortality rate for the novel coronavirus. It's estimated about 2%. So if the mortality rate's 2%, if it's 1%, even if it's 0.5%, and 300 million people get infected, that's a lot of people that could potentially die. Because if you think back into the Spanish flu, enormous numbers of people died, but the actual mortality rate was less than 1%, but a huge number of people were infected.
The World Health Organization is this morning warning the coronavirus could pose a greater global threat than terrorism.
A virus can have more powerful consequences than any terrorist action. And that's true. And if the world doesn't want to wake up and consider this enemy virus as public enemy number one, I don't think we will learn from our lessons.
We just don't know how this outbreak is going to develop, or how many people are ultimately going to be infected or ultimately going to die from this disease. We don't yet know exactly how the virus is evolving. We don't know how many people are actually infected that are not revealed to be infected, and we don't know how many people are dying that are misdiagnosed as dying from other disease. So this is a real problem for us to be able to make any real prediction or to model the spread of this disease.
I think the worst case scenario is that we are unable to contain the virus, that we see sustained human-to-human transmission in many parts of the world.
The World Health Organization says the window of opportunity to contain the coronavirus outbreak is narrowing. The statement comes as concerns grow in South Korea and the Middle East about the number of cases. There have also been more cases confirmed among Australians evacuated from a cruise ship in Japan.
So I really don't know what the near future is going to bring. We've got no information about how long we're going to be in here. There's no indication whatsoever. I've got sick people living next door to me. I've got sick people above me. I've got sick people across the lane from me. Some of those people have got chains on their doors so people can't access them because I'm hiding from a virus that you can't see and a government that you don't want to muck around with.
Pillage and burn!
Okay. Good morning. I know we're on a bit tight timeline, everybody, so we're going to get right into things here. I have with me Dr. Eileen de Villa, who's the Medical Officer of Health from Toronto, and of course Dr. Yaffe, Associate Chief Medical Officer of Health. I'm going to start with Dr. DeVille is going to give you a summary of the new presumptive positive case, and we'll leave some time for questions if we can at the end there, so we'll move through things. So over to you, Eileen.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Williams, and good morning, everybody. As you've heard, we have a new presumptive positive case, and effectively, as you've seen through the news release, it was on February 21st that we had an adult woman, a woman in her 20s, who arrived in Canada after having traveled in China. And in that travel to China, we know that it did include some travel to Hubei province and to Wuhan in particular. However, as this young woman in her 20s arrived, we know that she had had an intermittent cough, and in fact that cough was improving and had been resolving for a couple of weeks now. It's interesting to note as well that the individual, despite the fact that they had an improving and resolving situation in terms of their health, she did wear a mask during her travel. When she arrived in Toronto, she was given instructions at the airport to contact Ontario's telehealth information line, which she did. And when she described her history of travel to the affected area, and she described her symptoms, which were resolving, she was referred then by the telehealth line to hospital. So with that, the person presented immediately to North York General Hospital and was managed there, having had the history, with all the appropriate infection prevention and control procedures and protocols. She received a thorough medical assessment, and COVID-19 testing was initiated.
Bold, aren't you?
However, given the individual's health circumstances, and given the fact that she actually is resolving and is quite well, the patient was discharged, was told to self-isolate, and I'm pleased to say is presently recovering well at home and in isolation. I think it's important as well to note that since arriving in Toronto, the individual has had very, very limited exposure to others. Our staff at Toronto Public Health are following up directly to connect with this individual on a very regular basis, and we are monitoring her symptoms. We will clear her, as has been the case for others, as non-infectious when we have 2 tests taken 24 hours apart, showing that the person no longer has any virus. I at this time can also tell you that our Toronto Public Health team are actively following up with close contacts of this newly identified case, as we have with the previous cases that we've seen here in Toronto. I think it's very important to note that the whole process that has been followed from start to finish here shows that in fact that the system is working quite well to keep people safe. We had an individual who had a relevant travel history and symptoms associated with COVID-19, followed all the appropriate precautions, informed people, wore a mask, has limited exposure to others, and I think that is all evidence of the system working well to keep residents safe, and as such, at this time, the risk here in Toronto continues to be low. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Davila. I think those are very important notes of the system performing well. And I think that just gives an example of how this is ongoing. Even North York General Hospital, we work very closely with them, and they did exactly what they're supposed to do in the right time. I'm going to ask Dr. Yaffe now to cover the Ontario and the global numbers in a quick summary, as well as comment on some of the further testing of this individual, as well as things going on at the federal, provincial, territorial level in this changing situation on a global perspective. Over Dr. Yaffe.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So I'm not going to go through all the numbers globally, but I will say that we are particularly closely watching some countries where there seems to have been quite an increase in cases. South Korea, with this morning 833 cases, of which there have been 8 deaths. Italy, 226 cases with 5 deaths, and Iran with 61 cases and 12 deaths. As well, some countries have been added today. Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Bahrain, all of which cases had a travel history to Iran. So in terms of Public Health Ontario laboratory testing, they are continuing to test. At this point, as of this morning, there have been a total of 540 negative tests. 9 are currently under investigation. We have the 3 cases that are now resolved, and we have the 1 new presumptive positive, which you just heard about. In terms of this new presumptive, the first test done by the Public Health Lab came out borderline or inconclusive and had to be repeated, and are now at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg for confirmation. And I think it's interesting to note that this is similar to what happened with the case we had in the young female in London, where it was, again, a younger person, a healthy person with a mild case, and that case resolved very quickly. So that's pretty much what we're expecting with this one as well. It's a low positive test. How risky or not that is, we're taking precautions, but it's probably very low risk to others. And as we've heard, she's already her condition is resolving. In terms of the federal, provincial, territorial work, the technical committee and the special advisory committee are all meeting early this week to consider what is happening across the world and whether the case definition should be altered. Thank you.
Thank you. And on our situation here in Ontario, the Trenton cohort that we continue to do is testing of some individuals. All those tests have been negative, as well as the ones at NAV Canada and Cornwall. And the second cohort is due to be released tomorrow. So that's also good news. And the NAV Canada one, it's day 4, and that's progressing well, and that like there. So I think the aspect we're trying to deal with there is that we have in Ontario where we have our person under investigation. We also have ones where we allow healthcare practitioners, if they have areas of concern that they want to bring forward, they can order testing. We have not stopped them from doing that. And so we're allowing that wider surveillance modality. And of course, we're going to be addressing, along with our federal, provincial, territorial partners, how we should continue to expand if we have areas of risk and how we're going to assess that. As well as we're continually assess what's the status of a pandemic response on a Canadian perspective, but on a global perspective, waiting for the updates that you heard some recently from the WHO, and we're going to keep monitoring that as well as with the public health. So with that, I'm going to open up for questions because I know we have limited time this morning. So, any questions?
Say that you're following up with the people that she was in contact with on when she got home, or on the does that include on the flight, and what exactly do you mean by following up?
So this is what we do in respect of every infectious disease. We try to understand who might have been exposed to somebody who has actually been identified as infected, say in this case with COVID-19. So yes, it includes those who are within a close range, close contacts identified from the airplane, and anybody else in Toronto. This individual actually has very limited household contacts, and we are actively following up with contacts from the plane. And given the existing travel circumstances now, there are actually very few plane contacts to follow up with, but that is in progress right now.
Can you elaborate at all, excuse me, on her travel history? You mentioned she had been to Wuhan, but also this, now we're in late February, and Wuhan was quarantined quite some time ago.
So at a high level, this individual had traveled to China at the end of last year, was in Wuhan and Hubei province earlier in this year, in January, prior to the shutdown. Managed to leave, was still in China thereafter, returned to Canada on February 21st.
Other areas of China?
That's correct.
Dr. DeBell, can you just describe again, I know you guys have on the flight, what does close contact mean? How many rows are we talking
A new
about?
era begins!
So the scientific advice that has been provided to us through our colleagues at Public Health Ontario suggests that at this stage of the game, we're looking at 2 persons away from the case in all directions. So that's the current best available scientific advice.
Because we are talking about droplet spread, we're looking at that 6-meter perimeter.
6 foot.
6 foot. 2 meters.
you see with the spread in other countries like Iran and Italy. Can you just talk about why you believe things seem to be relatively under control here in the cases, while it's kind of increasing in other countries, it remains low and in control here in Canada and Ontario?
It's a good question. I think we don't want to be complacent just because that's the case. We want to keep looking at our surveillance, keep encouraging citizens and individuals who are returning, because most of it still is travel related, coming back into Ontario perspective and coming forward if they think they have concerns and issues. We don't want to discourage that. We want to encourage that. We want a system that's ready to respond to that, and we continue to address that to see how we can make sure that that is occurring in a timely way to allow our different partners to take part in that, protecting the privacy of the individual without discrimination, that kind of aspect there. And that seems to be working for us. As far as others, it's a little hard if they don't know where the source is coming in. I think they're trying to catch up on that. I understand in Italy, where was the index case? How did it enter into the communities? What parts? This is our challenge, and this is why you have to always have very enhanced surveillance systems to be as sensitive as you can, allowing the aspect that we're still dealing with travel related. We have not had secondary spread in Ontario.
Nous sommes aujourd'hui le dimanche 9 février 2020. Je veux revenir avec vous et commenter.
Deux scènes de crime à Hanau, près de Francfort. Hier soir, un Allemand de 43 ans a tué au moins 9 personnes dans des bars à chicha, fréquentés notamment par la communauté kurde. L'assaillant a été retrouvé mort à son domicile. Des écrits témoignant de sa haine des étrangers et des non-blancs ont été retrouvés. Angela Merkel a condamné ces attaques xénophobes.
Rassismus ist ein Gift. Der Hass ist ein Gift. Und dieses Gift existiert in unserer Gesellschaft und es ist schuld an schon viel zu vielen Verbrechen.
5 ans après la crise des réfugiés, l'Allemagne est confrontée à une montée en puissance d'une extrême droite qui ne se contente plus de manifester. Les actions violentes se multiplient. Vendredi dernier, 12 hommes ont été arrêtés. Ils projetaient de s'attaquer à des mosquées. Il y a 3 mois, un extrémiste de droite a tenté de commettre un attentat dans une synagogue de Halle. En juin, c'est un élu de la CDU qui a été tué par balle par un sympathisant néo-nazi. Comme d'autres défenseurs de l'accueil des réfugiés, il avait reçu des menaces de mort. Un climat pesant évoqué le mois dernier lors des commémorations de la libération des prisonniers du camp d'Auschwitz.
Nous pensions que les vieux démons disparaîtraient avec le temps. Mais non. Les esprits maléfiques passés apparaissent désormais sous de nouveaux aspects.
Comment expliquer la recrudescence du terrorisme d'extrême droite en Allemagne? Peut-il déstabiliser le pays? Avec quelles conséquences pour l'Europe?
Pour en parler, votre cravate est parfaitement ajustée. Jean-Louis Bourlange, bonsoir. Vous êtes député modem des Hauts-de-Seine. Vous avez été député européen de 1989 à 2007, pendant 18 années. Selon vous, Jean-Louis Bourlange, sur cette question de l'extrême droite, nous sommes tous logés à la même enseigne. Il faut une réponse européenne. Vous estimez qu'on observe partout un raidissement autoritaire et une rupture inquiétante. À côté de vous, Thomas Hanke, bonsoir. Vous êtes correspondant à Paris au quotidien allemand Handelsblatt et vous considérez qu'il y a en Allemagne à peu près 2000 personnes qui sont potentiellement armées et capables donc de commettre des actes de violence raciste. La justice ne prennent sans doute pas suffisamment au sérieux cette menace. Et enfin, Béatrice Gibelin, bonsoir, vous êtes géographe et directrice de la revue de géopolitique Hérodote. Selon vous, Béatrice Gibelin, la situation est préoccupante, même si l'Allemagne n'est pas déstabilisée. L'extrême droite est représentée dans des instances nationales et régionales avec des discours de certains leaders qui font littéralement froid dans le dos. Nadia, on démarre le débat avec une question que vous avez sélectionnée parmi toutes celles que nous avons reçues. Elles sont nombreuses.
Exactement.
De nos internautes.
Et c'est la question d'un téléspectateur qui demande, dans le cas de la ville de Hanau, donc là s'est déroulé, de quelle extrême droite parle-t-on, Thomas Hanke, de quelle idéologie l'extrême droite allemande dont on parle, et notamment à propos de cet attentat?
Il y a un front commun de l'extrême droite violente. C'est de dire que le peuple allemand est menacé, que les politiques démocrates sont des traîtres du peuple, qu'il y a une politique de grand remplacement et que maintenant il faut passer à l'acte pour stopper cette politique et pour chasser les étrangers qui sont déjà installés en Allemagne. C'est pour ça qu'il a choisi comme cible les Allemands qui étaient tous d'origine étrangère, turcs et autres. Et c'est ça le front commun des différents courants qu'il y a dans l'extrême droite.
C'est la haine de l'étranger.
Voilà, c'est ça.
Un chiffre, le chiffre du jour, Hélène.
8605 comme le nombre de délits et de crimes imputés à l'extrême droite en Allemagne sur le premier semestre 2019. Ce sont les chiffres du ministère de l'Intérieur. Béatrice Jublin, comment est-ce qu'on explique cette recrudescence, cette accélération aussi des attaques de l'extrême droite en Allemagne?
Comme vient de le dire Thomas Sanke, on est sur un rejet violent, fort par une partie de la population qui est très minoritaire, quand même à le dire, de cette immigration, avec le sentiment que la survie à la limite du peuple allemand est menacée, d'autant plus que la démographie en Allemagne est effectivement faible, puisqu'on pense qu'il y a à peu près en une vingtaine d'années, une petite vingtaine d'années, moins de 5 millions d'Allemands avec une baisse démographique. Donc nécessairement une arrivée relativement forte, avec une accélération depuis, on va dire, les années 2010, peut-être même un peu avant, d'une arrivée massive d'une population étrangère hors européenne, parce qu'il y a une population étrangère ou d'origine étrangère qui est plus nombreuse en Allemagne qu'elle ne l'est en France, mais elle était essentiellement européenne, tandis que là, c'est une arrivée qui vient, on l'a vu, de Syrie, d'Afghanistan, du Kazakhstan et autres, qui est en plus musulmane, et avec des Turcs qui sont là depuis très très longtemps, et avec une impression, si vous voulez, que la survie de la nation est presque en jeu, parce qu'on était quand même sur une nation où c'était le droit du sang qui primait, donc c'était ça qui était premier, alors que nous on est sur une autre je vais dire, idéologie et culture qui est celle du droit du sol. Et donc aujourd'hui l'Allemagne est ouverte au droit du sol, mais le sentiment qu'on perd cette homogénéité essentielle de la nation, ce qui est complètement un mythe. Il y a jamais eu une nation totalement homogène, mais c'est, je crois, fort comme ressort, si vous voulez, aujourd'hui.
Vous le dateriez à 2015. En 2015, Jean-Louis Bourlange, avec, on se souvient, l'image d'Angela Merkel accueillant, disant « Nous pouvons accueillir un million de réfugiés ». Vous pensez que ça a été une date déterminante?
2015, ça a été important. Je crois qu'Angela Merkel a fait une erreur de diagnostic, c'est-à-dire qu'elle a considéré qu'elle pouvait, en tant que représentante d'une grande démocratie, amie des droits de l'homme, etc., elle pouvait accueillir les immigrés d'autant plus facilement qu'économiquement, la situation démographique allemande appelait une main-d'œuvre supplémentaire et que les patrons étaient tout à fait d'accord. Donc elle avait le sentiment de s'avancer sur un terrain assez sûr. Or, elle a méconnu le fait que les classes moyennes allemandes étaient directement confrontées à une immigration qui était un peu différente, parce que l'immigration turque était quand même... C'était une immigration maghrébine, l'immigration de la Saint-Sylvestre. C'était un peu plus désordonné que l'immigration turque, plus l'immigration venue effectivement de Syrie, etc. Mais moi, je suis de ceux qui pensent que c'est bien plus profond que le problème de l'immigration. Je crois qu'il y a une inquiétude qui est commune au peuple d'Europe, qui prend des formes différentes selon les pays et qui est provoquée par un sentiment de précarité de la situation politique, économique, sociale.
C'est du ressenti ou c'est vécu? C'est rationnel.
Les deux, c'est
vécu et ressenti, c'est la même chose. Est-ce que c'est... je pense que les gens ont le sentiment d'être menacés économiquement par la montée de la Chine. Ils ont l'impression, et je pense qu'en Allemagne c'est très important, parce que l'Alliance Atlantique est un facteur constitutif de l'identité de la République fédérale depuis les années 50. Ils ont le sentiment que l'Amérique est un partenaire qui devient moins fiable, et en même temps ils refusent absolument cette idée. Il y a cette vague individualiste qui déferle sur l'ensemble de l'Europe et qui fait que nous ne nous reconnaissons plus sur autre chose que sur des petites communautés fragmentées, séparées. On voit le phénomène en France également, M. Fouquet l'a analysé. Donc je pense que de façon très différente, en Italie, on a quand même un effondrement des valeurs de rassemblement incarnées par l'Église au profit de la Lega. Tout ça, c'est une situation très critique et très générale.
Mais on va revenir sur l'Allemagne, c'est quand même un cas particulier, Thomas Sanke. On a beaucoup parlé de l'extrême droite et de la montée de l'extrême droite en Allemagne de l'Est. Là, l'Allemagne de l'Ouest. Est-ce que l'Allemagne a un territoire de mémoire?
Oui et non. D'ailleurs, Je trouve que ce serait une erreur de dire que l'année 2015 et la vague des réfugiés, c'est l'année charnière. C'est pas ça. Il faut se souvenir que la première vague d'attentats de l'extrême droite meurtrière se passe entre 2001 et 2007. Il n'y a pas encore de réfugiés de Syrie ni d'Afghanistan, très peu. Et donc c'était fait par une équipe, un petit gang de 3 personnes de l'extrême droite qui étaient sur le radar pour l'intérieur, donc la DGSI allemande, mais qui les ont perdus, qui n'ont pas pris au sérieux ce groupuscule qui était passé complètement dans l'illégalité avec tout un réseau qui les supportait, leur passait des armes, de l'argent, des faux passeports, tout ça. Donc ça date de là. Et en 2004, il y a déjà une étude il y a un potentiel d'une extrême droite qui est extrêmement violente et prête à passer à l'acte. Mais après, on n'a pas tiré les conclusions. C'est là qu'on n'a pas fait son devoir de mémoire. On ne s'est pas souvenu qu'il y a une partie de la population qui n'est pas de droite, qui n'est même pas d'extrême droite, mais qui est violente, qui voit l'étranger comme un ennemi qu'il faut éliminer, comme les nazis voulaient éliminer les juifs. Et c'est là la différence qu'il faut voir. On a oublié d'une certaine manière, on peut être de droite, on peut même être très à droite, on peut être contre les immigrés, on peut critiquer tout ce qu'on veut, mais il y a un mur infranchissable qui nous sépare, les démocrates, de ceux qui veulent éliminer physiquement les
par la violence
et autres, des gens qui sont des étrangers, des étrangers, et qui veulent détruire le système démocratique. C'est ça le mur qui nous sépare de ce... Et c'est là qu'un certain devoir politique que les partis démocratiques avaient oublié de dire que c'est pour ça que l'extrême droite n'est pas comparable à l'extrême gauche. L'extrême gauche, on peut critiquer pour beaucoup de raisons, mais elle ne peut pas détruire physiquement les adversaires, ni détruire complètement le système démocratique en Allemagne.
Mais quels adversaires? Il ne s'agit pas d'adversaires en plus. Quels adversaires? Peut-on écouter quelqu'un?
Oui, parce que l'inquiétude de la communauté juive et de la communauté musulmane ne date pas d'hier en Allemagne. Voici Ayman Maziek, il est président du Conseil central des musulmans d'Allemagne. Le 19 mars 2019, il y a un peu moins d'un an, il réagissait aux attentats de Christchurch en Nouvelle-Zélande. L'attaque de 2
Il ne s'agit pas seulement de chagrin, mais aussi et surtout de peur. Plusieurs parents m'ont confié qu'ils avaient peur d'emmener leurs enfants à la mosquée, parce qu'ils craignent qu'il se passe quelque chose. Et il ne s'agit pas ici d'un sentiment de sécurité subjectif, mais clairement de menaces concrètes, d'un changement concret du niveau de menace que nous connaissons ces dernières années.
Donc ça, c'était il y a un peu moins d'un an. Depuis, rien n'a bougé. Béatrice Gibelin, comment est-ce qu'on explique ça? Les autorités, la police n'ont pas pris la mesure, la conscience de ce qui était en train de se passer dans leur pays?
Je pense que c'est quelques contextes en tout cas. Quand vous avez remontré des images de l'arrivée des étrangers syriens et autres en 2015, qui ont été accueillis par des grands panneaux, welcome,
des banderoles,
etc., des banderoles, etc. Donc le sentiment que ça se passait au fond pas si mal, hein, sans prendre effectivement vraiment la mesure et de la réaction très hostile d'une partie de la population. Il ne faut pas oublier quand même que le mouvement d'extrême droite, il est né à l'ouest. Vous vous étonniez en disant « Ah ben c'est à l'est et puis voilà, cette fois-ci ça se passe ». Bon, eh bien c'est d'abord le NPD qui était un mouvement national, le parti de l'Allemagne, démocrate de l'Allemagne, était un mouvement qui est né à l'ouest et qui a eu toute une stratégie d'implantation à l'est avec une très très grande habileté, en choisissant le Mecklembourg et Saxe-Anhalt, qui sont effectivement deux Länder où l'extrême droite a vraiment émergé. Puis après ça, elle s'est diffusée. Donc il ne faudrait pas, si vous voulez, faire une seule opposition Est-Ouest. Il existe un mouvement aussi, j'allais dire, d'extrême droite à l'Ouest. Et il s'est évidemment... Et ils sont maintenant très très forts aussi, bien sûr, à l'Est, alors que les étrangers sont beaucoup moins nombreux à l'Est qu'à l'Ouest.
Donc on a sous-estimé cette poussée de l'extrême droite et cette poussée des groupuscules.
Oui, sans doute, parce que vous avez aussi en Allemagne tout un mouvement de la société civile qui résiste à cette extrême droite. Quand vous avez des manifestations d'extrême droite, vous avez aussi des contre-manifestations et qui sont largement et parfois nettement plus nombreuses. Quand il y a eu le mouvement Pegida ou identitaire que vous aviez à l'Est, vous aviez des réactions extrêmement fortes. Donc d'une certaine façon, on pouvait aussi se dire, ben voilà, on a une antidote. Alors on a sûrement sous-estimé, on n'a pas fait suffisamment attention à ce qui se passait sur les réseaux sociaux, parce que les déclarations, elles étaient...
Cases continue to explode in Italy and in South Korea. It looks like we've reached a tipping point of awareness. And some countries probably fibbing about their numbers. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Martinson. I'm here today on February 24th, 2020 with your COVID-19 update, your coronavirus update. I'm titling this one, Are You Prepared? Let's go to the numbers. Again, we got numbers from China. Yep, that's about all we got. We don't know what they really mean, and China is doing everything it can to put a good face in this and show that they are past this particular coronavirus incident as best they can. They want people to get back to work. We're going to talk about that because it's really important. A lot of countries are going to have to make that same decision soon. It's not an easy one, but South Korea, wow, vaulting right up here. 231 new cases. Notice here 8 total deaths, and this comes into play when we look at where we are in Iran with 12 total deaths. There is just no way that Iran with 12 deaths has only 47 cases. There's a bit of a kerfuffle in Iran about how many cases they have, how many deaths they have. The deaths may be as high as 50. We don't know. But they're also reporting nobody serious. So these numbers, completely suspect and absolutely not correct at this point in time. Everything's higher. And that much we can say for sure, but we don't know how much. The Disaster Princess, this is pretty much over now. Everybody's been sort of taken off and repatriated. The total cases got logged on there. It's going to be stuck there for a while, but we are seeing in the United States, these plus 18 that showed up in the United States were people who were flown back and got infected on the plane ride back, or were just asymptomatic and arrived and became symptomatic. But one way or the other, they showed up and became infected here in the United States. Italy. Another 66 cases coming to 223. More deaths again of elderly people mainly. Total deaths now 6, and I think that's actually come up since we've seen that. But look at this one. This Thailand still at 35. These numbers have just been frozen in ice for a week or more now. I don't believe these, not for a second. And I don't believe these Vietnam numbers either, sharing that huge border with China, knowing that they had put a 10,000 person community into quarantine. Not a peep since. I'm not buying any of it. In fact, here you have to read through and look at your clues. The UAE banned citizens traveling to Iran and Thailand to prevent the spread of coronavirus. The foreign ministry says, "Why Thailand? I thought we just said Thailand doesn't have a problem. They haven't had a new case reported in weeks." But here you have a country saying, and a pretty sophisticated country saying, "You know what? Don't go to Iran where we know there's a raging outbreak, or Thailand." So I'm going to take my clues from that and say Thailand's just not being on the up and up about their particular case set. Italy, look at this case progression. Day by day, one day later, well, that's a 5-fold increase. That's about a 3-fold increase that next day. Here, at least a little bit more than a 2x increase. Probably aiming for a 2x increase today. The day is still in progress. Italy's working very hard to get these numbers under control and put full containment in, and they've got a good medical system, so I would not be surprised if they get their arms around this, but it just shows how explosively virulent and this particular coronavirus actually is. And yeah, here, Italy reports another death from coronavirus, raising the toll to 7. The latest patient, 62, kind of on the young side for deaths. So it just, whatever marched into Italy, and I would love to see that it's been sequenced and it's exactly the same thing as the strains that were in China, because this all feels just a little bit more virulent than I would have expected, or China's really downplayed their results more than I thought. In Iran now has shut schools, it's shut universities, cultural centers, all kinds of things, all within a fairly substantial region inside of Iran. Again, this does not comport well with the idea that they have just a handful of cases. That doesn't fit at all. And Iran is now denying that it's covered up 6 deaths as reported. Denies a cover-up as 6 deaths are reported in Italy. Tehran rejects the claim that the death toll is more than 4 times higher than official figures suggest. It could be 4, could be 12. We don't really know. But this is just another country that prefers to be less than forthcoming with the data. I don't know, because it's embarrassing, because they don't want to scare their people, because I don't know what. But there are countries that take that route, and then there are countries like South Korea that go the other direction and are very, very open, very transparent about what they're up to. So as we saw yesterday, we had all these cases exploding out, and now, this is where we were February 23rd, 22nd at 436 cases, and now in Korea, well over 800 here. So that's just gone really, out of control there, and good luck to South Korea getting their arms around that. In the United States, so the CDC reportedly opposed the State Department's decision to allow 14 individuals who were confirmed to be infected to travel on the evac flight after their cases were confirmed just before takeoff, thanks to one of the many botched drop-the-ball moments attributed to Japanese health officials, or bureaucrats in many cases. So, whose lot of fingers being pointed here? Was it the Japanese health officials that botched this? Was it the State Department overriding the CDC? It was a State Department flight, so this is on the State Department. They made the decision, you know what, let's take everyone that's sitting on this plane. Somebody made that decision. I doubt it was the State Department. I bet somebody who made that decision has a name. That would be interesting to find out, I think. And this is exactly what they were warned about. In addition to the 14 people who were already infected, it appears another 25 were infected on the flight back, where sick individuals were separated by the rest using duct tape and a thin tarp-like sheet. I thought when they were going to evac those people that they had some kind of I thought it wasn't rinky-dink. I thought they would have had some sort of an isolation chamber in the back, or some way of isolating those two cohorts of people, populations from each other, but apparently not. Apparently duct tape. I'm gonna have to rethink my own preparations here, because I have duct tape's part of mine, but I'm not trying to fly 14 infected people around with a whole plane load of other folks. So that's really not good news right there. That's a botched moment as well. And China, and also China. Here's China. China has 6 provinces are lowering their coronavirus emergency response level. As of late this morning, Guangdong, Shanxi lowered response to level 2. And these other ones here all lowered it to level 3. So China's saying, time to get back in the pool. We'd like people to go back to work. We're lowering the response levels here. Don't worry about it. Also, China postpones the National People's Congress, which is their biggest and most important bureaucratic meeting and political meeting of the year, and so they postponed it. It's been a long time since anything like that happened. So you got China saying, don't worry, everything's back in the pool, but for the important people, if I can phrase it that way, who make the decisions and run the country, they're like, you know what? We'd rather not gather. Everybody else can gather. I don't think we're ready to gather. I always trust what people do more than what they say. And that's just how we roll. All right, you know what? It's been a month since I first started tracking this thing. I was getting pieces of information that were starting to float across my normal information tracking routine. Back in around January 20th is where it really started to pop up, and I started looking at it. By Wednesday night, I realized I had to write something. So this came out on Thursday morning on January 23rd. That's now a month and a day ago, 6 in the morning. And I just had to get this out, and so we made this alert public for everybody, because normally these alerts are issued. I only issue them when events cause me to take personal action. So if I feel like I got to run down to Costco and get some more toilet paper because I'm worried we're about to get to the self-evidence stage, I'll send out an alert to people. So that's what I did, but I made this one public because it was just too important, and I didn't want to... this felt like I had to get it out to everybody. And so here's what I wrote back then. You can go and find the entire article here. I stand by every word. Got it really, really right, considering how much data we had to go on at that point in time. So I wrote, the coronavirus currently sweeping across China. So far it has all the hallmarks of a potential true pandemic outbreak. Those just how it appeared to me based on everything I could find out virologically about it and from what the data was saying, and also how China was reacting. Those pieces together made me write it that way. And while it could still and hopefully will be contained and burn itself out, the chances of that are slipping by the hour. And of course, they slip every single time you do something like flying infected people with uninfected people. These botched things, you don't get many botched efforts when it comes to a pandemic like this. You got to get it right. If any actual pandemic breaks out, expect the following to happen quickly. Travel within and especially between the countries will be restricted, if not completely banned. Critical shortages of materials will develop, especially medical supplies, doubly especially antivirals. In cities with lockdowns or quarantines, food will disappear rapidly from shelves. So check. Listen, I'm not here to toot my horn and say, hey, I managed to get something right. What happened here is this is just what happens when you watch science and you're not constrained by political boundaries of saying things that are not politically correct or not within the Overton window or might upset your boss because it hasn't been cleared from the PR department. This is the value of just applying good, solid logic, especially during a fast-moving situation. Of course, I did give a pro tip out way back then that people might want to think about getting face masks. And of course, always, don't be a hoarder. Buy only what you really need. The time to responsibly stock up was actually before now, and that's always been part of our message. But now that we've got here and this month has passed and we've hit this little tipping point, the markets have finally started to melt down. This is just a screen grab from just a few minutes ago. We see the S&P and the Dow down big amounts. Oil is down, of course, because oil is used heavily in economic processes. So when you see oil and copper down, what this is really saying between these two plus all of these other ones up here, but these two in particular are saying the economy is really getting tanked here because you use a lot of copper in the economy, use a lot of oil in the economy. And I've been reading reports from people who say that the air in Hong Kong, in Beijing, is as clear as it's ever been in decades. You can see the stars at night again. It's just a measure of how much oil isn't being burned, how much coal isn't being burned, how much natural gas isn't being used, because their economy is really very much in a full lockdown. Gold and silver, of course, doing reasonably well in an environment like this because, those tend to hedge against systemic problems, financial system problems, and there's going to be a lot of financial system problems with it, so that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about that idea that China is trying to get its people back to work. I get it. I'm totally sensitive to the idea, and there's a really tricky balancing act that every country that now has this particular disease is going to have to struggle with. And here's that balancing act. Number one, if you want to contain this thing and you want it to stop spreading, you got to get the R0 below 1, meaning on average, somebody who's got the disease during their infective period, which by the way, could be before, during, and after the symptoms, right? You need to keep people isolated and contained to prevent the spread. And that is what you got to do to help get the R0 below 1. So, that's part one. Great. If that was our only thing we had to balance, not a problem. We'll just lock everybody up, we'll bring food to the door, and that'll be great. Unfortunately, there's this other balancing act, which is you kind of need to keep the economy going. At least enough to feed everyone, for sure. Maybe keep them warm. All kinds of critical things have to happen to keep the economy going. But there's the balancing act, because if people are contained, they're not over here working. But if they're over here working, then there's a chance that this thing isn't going to be isolated and contained, which brings us to the third piece in this balancing act, which is you need to keep the infection rate below the level that swamps the hospitals. So way over here, if everybody's contained and you've got good functioning hospitals, case fatality rate, I don't know, it might be as low as 1% once we add up everybody who's got the disease, including the people who didn't even know they had it, who were asymptomatic the whole way through, including the people who had mild illnesses. We don't know. But over here, you have about, let's call it between 1 and 3% case fatality rate. But if you swamp your hospitals, now you have a case fatality rate that might spike to 18%. And this is very, very bad. So you have to balance across all three of these. Contain people as much as you can. China thinks they've got that, and they've cracked the nut on that, and that their numbers are leveling off, which I believe they are. And now they're saying we want to get people over here, but they have to do it at a rate that doesn't make this come back into being. And looking at how quickly this is all exploding in Italy, China isn't out of the woods. It's not like they've got herd immunity now. It's not like enough people have gotten it. If we take their numbers at face value, there are, 11 million people in the city of Wuhan, and they've only admitted to maybe 78,000 cases now across the entire country. So that's a fraction of a percent of the people who might be within the area where it's now endemic. So no fire breaks there yet. You would need to have maybe 60-70% of the people would have had to have been exposed to give you a fire break effect. So they got a bunch of people hiding out from the disease who, if they come back out into public over here, they're going to get the disease. And if too many of them get it, they end up over here. So what's the right number, and how do you begin to manage all of that? That's the balancing act, and that's what every country that gets this is going to have to figure out how to balance. In other news, oh my God, I put this one under, I don't even know what to say. What are you going to say, right? The WHO says it's no longer going to use the pandemic category. The virus, it's still an emergency, but we're just not going to say pandemic anymore. So it no longer uses the term pandemic. I guess because
a new era begins.
I don't know, that they ran a focus study group and people didn't like that word and made them unhappy. I don't know what's going on here, but the WHO is spending all this time wordsmithing. Here's a wordsmith, COVID-19. They had to wordsmith that so that nobody's offended by it. And now they're not going to use pandemic, and they're doing all of this. But what they're not doing is providing really excellent, timely, useful information. So remember, you can't have a pandemic if you don't call it that. That's pretty smart. That's pretty smart. Way back in on that first article that I told you about that I wrote back in January 23rd, I had put out the WHO pandemic guidelines, and I was crossing off the phases as we got there. By the way, we can cross out phase 4 because we've got there, which was human-to-human transmission, which we certainly have. Able to sustain community-level outbreaks has been verified. Absolutely. Phase 5. The same identified viruses cause sustained community-level outbreaks in 2 or more countries. Yep, that's passed. In addition to the criteria in Phase 5, the same virus has caused sustained community-level outbreaks in at least one other country in another WHO region. Yep. So I think once we ticked off Phase 6 with Italy and Iran getting on board there, that's when the full pandemic, you couldn't avoid calling it a pandemic anymore. So the WHO said, you know what? We're not using that term anymore. So, at any rate, they had to drop it because... All right, once again, though, I got to turn to it. Singapore is absolutely leading the way. So, remember yesterday we said that they had no new cases. They have a case today. It's I think, one more case today. Let's go back to the numbers real quick. Yeah, one more case today. That's fine. All right, so they really have their arms around this. And so I wanted to talk about this paper that came out on February 20th here, and it's in the JAMAnetwork.com journals. Here's the URL for this. And they're talking about their current experience here, and there was some really interesting information in here that made me jealous as an American. I wish my health authorities were like this. So look how Singapore reacted to this. This is really important to check out. Singapore promptly shifted its public health response level to enhance preparedness in its diagnosis first case, a tourist from Wuhan on January 23rd. Okay? So all the way back there, the range of public health measures that were instituted and rapidly escalated, right there on that spot with the first case, right, included aggressive contact tracing, quarantine of close contacts of confirmed cases, namely persons who had spent a prolonged period within 2 meters of a confirmed case. Look at how defined that is. A prolonged period, maybe they could sharpen that up for me a little bit, but were you within 6 feet or so of this person? How long? Oops, with quarantine. They put out travel advisories right away, and then entry restrictions on people traveling from Hubei. And on January 31st, so that's 8 days later, entry restrictions on people who had traveled to China in the preceding 14 days. Approximately 700 recent travelers from Hubei were quarantined, and Singaporeans, permanent residents, long-term visa holders returning from China were placed under a 14-day compulsory leave of absence from work. That's what it looks like and feels like when you've got people who are on the ball. No Singapore health officials are going to be putting 14 infected people on the back of a plane and putting some tape and a piece of sheeting up, okay? It's not how they roll, right? The approach taken by Singapore, learning from its experience with SARS, so they learned from it, didn't just happen and they forgot about it and promised they'd do something later and never did, right? Is that all confirmed cases are isolated until 2 consecutive respiratory samples become negative over 2 days. Close contacts are identified, and those individuals without symptoms are quarantined for 14 days from last exposure. As of February 19th, a total of 2,593 close contacts have been identified. Of these, 1,172 are currently quarantined. 1,421 have completed their quarantine. Contacts with symptoms are tested for COVID-19. That's how they roll, right? Aggressive contact tracing. That's what you do. And as well, they're also testing very aggressively. So let me make sure I spell this correctly up here, because I like to do that. Here, the second, and continuing on with this paper, the early presentation of COVID-19 infection is typically nonspecific. Oh, they presented to primary care clinics with common and mild symptoms: a dry cough, a sore throat, a low-grade fever, a little malaise, before worsening of symptoms several days later triggered attendance at hospital emergency departments. So they got the progression down here. Because acute respiratory infections are very common, there's a pressing requirement for a rapid, sensitive, affordable point-of-care screening test. Not ship it off to Atlanta so the CDC can test it for you from across the country. A point-of-care screening test in the primary care setting to identify suspected cases as early as possible to reduce community spread. It's critical that clinicians take a detailed travel and exposure history during this epidemic. Boom! That's how you do it. It's amazing. Let's contrast that with Canada. Here's a person from Canada. I just found this morning. He says, my chest x-rays came back. Here they are. Ooh, that doesn't look good. Look what's going on right there, right? In that lower left lobe, there's a bit of pneumonia there. Right is healthy, left is now with pneumonia. I have all symptoms: fever, cough, shortness of breath. I work with a lot of Asians. They won't test for COVID, even though doctor said I had viral symptoms. Reposted because my first symptom, anyway, didn't need to read that part. So here's a person, they're presenting, they're going to their doctor. This is in Canada. They said here, guys, the fun is over for me. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do. I called a medical advice line. They are saying the same thing. No travel, no close contact with anyone means no testing, right? And as we saw yesterday, the CDC won't test unless you personally have been to China, right? Or had traveled to China, or you had been exposed to somebody who was known to have COVID-19, right? So, and then let's just contrast that with South Korea. 11,631 people in South Korea are currently being tested for coronavirus, up from 8,725 this morning. More than 20,000 have already been tested, right? That's what you do, because why? Well, this thing's asymptomatic, because, it's got, this is just what you do. That's what you do. All right, let's contrast that with the United States. How's the United States doing? Because, Nancy Messonnier out of the CDC, the director there, has been constantly saying we don't have community-level outbreaks here, and that's good news. So that's really good news in the United States. Is that true? This is from the CDC website just this morning, and look, they're being very transparent with their data, and we find out that the total tested in the United States is 414 total so far. 414 people tested. Hey, good news, we only have 14 confirmed cases. I bet there's a ratio number going on here. I bet there's some sort of relationship there. 414. That's not even the last three digits in this particular number. This is what you need to do if you have any interest in finding it and detecting it. That's exactly what you do. All right. So this is kind of like they're not even trying here at this point. So this came out a couple days ago. U.S. prepares for coronavirus pandemic, school and business closures, health officials say. So the United States has yet to see community spread of the virus. Well, that's so reassuring until you understand what's going on here with this data. All right, I won't be annoyed anymore. Just bothers me as a scientist. In coming weeks, if the virus begins to spread through U.S. communities, health authorities want to be ready to adopt school and business closures like those undertaken in Asian countries to contain the disease. Here's this person, Nancy Messonnier here. We're not seeing community spread here in the United States yet, but it's very possible. You have to read all the way to the gray spot here, because you read all the way down this entire long article, and you find the last paragraph says only 3 U.S. states currently have the capacity to run tests for the virus locally. So remember, Singapore said it's critical, that you take these travel histories and do all of that, and as well, it's really, really important that people have the ability to do on-the-spot testing for these things. All right. Because of this, I'm reasonably certain, that the United States is going to have its time in the sun with this particular disease. It's here. 390,000 Asian students return in the United States from mainland China. Many of them go back and forth. It's unlikely that if even 100,000 of them went back for holidays and came back, that only 14 total people managed to be infected with that. Remember, prepare early, prepare often. This is Daegu, Korea at the moment. People here lining up for groceries, right? So day one, the day before this line happened, there was no grocery line whatsoever. And today there is, right? That's just how these things tend to go. All right. Guess what? This is not the flu. It's not SARS. I don't have anything brand new to add to all of this. The only thing I would begin to add would be how important it is that your health officials are communicating openly, transparently, giving you all the data, letting you know what you need to know so that you can be a part of the solution rather than treating us out here as if we were cattle or something that will tell us when we need to know. But the truth is, everybody ought to be engaging in proper hand washing and sanitation, learning how to stop touching our faces, learning that once we touch a public surface like a doorknob or a railing that our hands are now infected, possibly infected, and learning that we need to be really conscious if we do have any sort of coughs, sniffles, anything like that, to be the ones wearing the face masks so that we don't infect others, or to self-isolate, or both, right? That's all good stuff. All right, conclusions for today. Some countries definitely hiding their true numbers, no question about that. Thailand, Iran, pick a few others. I'm sure that's the case. The U.S. CDC, I don't know what they're up to. They aren't even really trying. 414 test kits run so far. That's insufficient, given that we're facing the largest and most deadly pandemic in the past 100 years. 414 cases. I would expect that for my town, and I live in a small town. Singapore, South Korea, they continue to lead the way in terms of how you would go about actually preparing for something like this. And Singapore did great stuff in advance, setting after SARS, and that was only a few tens of deaths in their country, but what they learned from that was they need isolation facilities, they stockpiled masks, gowns, all the basic antivirals. They actually, one of the reasons they're able to respond so aggressively here is that they had taken the SARS experience and used it to really go forward and up their preparation. So that's part of the reason that they're doing so well here. Iran and Italy have put a big dent in my theory, maybe not just my theory, I know other people had this too, that COVID-19 was somehow ethnically selective, that somehow Asians were more predisposed towards it. And I was thinking that for a while because, we saw the 12 people get it in Germany, and they all said they got over it pretty quick, and it was kind of like having the cold, and the cases didn't really seem to grab hold outside of China or other Asian countries. So that was a theory for a while. That just got the carpet completely pulled out from under its feet because we have Iran going through a very large outbreak right now, virulent outbreak, and we have Italy going through a very large virulent outbreak. So Persians and European stock, both now, so much for that theory. Just toss that one in the dumpster. The markets are only just now beginning to understand how serious this all is. There's going to be lots of printing by the central banks, but you can't print your way out of a supply chain nightmare. It just doesn't work. All of this really means that you really, 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 really ought to be preparing for this. And I know many of you are. I'm gratified to have found out how many of you started to prepare as a consequence of running across these videos earlier. Please come by peakprosperity.com where we have just a ton of material over there about how to prepare all out in the public space that you can access. And then we do have some places, things that we can't talk about in public because, I've already had Hatchet articles written about me in Mother Jones. Ironic, because they were supposed to be about citizen journalism, at least how they started. So I guess they've strayed from their mission. Bloomberg, got my wiki page taken down. Of course, all of these videos have been demonetized by Goog, and all of that. So these are all just measured, a little bit of shadow banning at Twitter. So there are things that I can't talk about in public because they're very speculative. It's very fast moving. I can't, point to 10 sources and say, here's why I think that. And people are able to have a little bit more of a free-form conversation. So that does happen behind our paywall. And there's a reason for that, though, and that's for my safety and it's for the safety of the other people back there, and that's why that exists. Otherwise, come on by and we'll help you out as best we can with all of your preparations, because gosh, this touches so many things and it's impossible to be perfectly prepared for something like this. All right, thank you for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.
Hi folks, Adam Taggart here. Chris Martinson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.
Isn't that the best you got?
Some of the coronavirus story we're following this morning. Canada has recorded a 10th case of COVID-19, presumptive at this point. A woman arriving in Ontario went to a hospital with a cough after she came back to Canada from China on Friday. She's now at home in self-isolation with mild symptoms. We're going to be getting a news conference from Ontario health officials later this morning. New cases and deaths associated with the coronavirus continue to climb right around the world. China, of course, still with the vast majority of cases, now over 79,000. And outside of China, we're talking about more than 1,700 cases in 33 countries. South Korea, a big flashpoint, on red alert with more than 830 infections. That surpasses the Diamond Princess as the largest cluster outside China. Iran with now over 60 cases, but there are reports that number is much higher. We're hearing about 50 deaths in one city today. And Italy, we had that report from Megan Williams in Rome, currently with more than 150 cases, 5 deaths reported today, and major efforts to crack down and contain the spread through Italy and on into Europe. Let's talk about all of this with Dr. Peter Daszak, an infectious disease expert, the president of EcoHealth Alliance. We've talked to him previously. He's been credited with identifying the origins of SARS. His work has been key in predicting the global impact of emerging diseases. He was at that WHO conference in Geneva earlier this month where we talked about the latest science coming out of that. And he's in New York this morning joining us again. And we're happy to welcome you back to the program, Dr. Daszak. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Heather.
I have been looking at a number of headlines and reports this morning. One included citing the WHO director saying the window of opportunity is narrowing to halt the progress of COVID-19. Essentially, that experts are saying we're reaching a tipping point in this outbreak. What is your assessment?
I think that's exactly right. We're at the point where I wouldn't be surprised if WHO called this a pandemic this week or next week. We've got multiple countries infected with community transmission in those countries. That's really the definition of a pandemic on different continents.
So they've called a news conference for this morning, 9:30. Is that something you might hear or might expect to hear from them today?
I think we'll either hear that they're calling it a pandemic or an explanation as to what needs to happen for it to become a pandemic. But look, this is all semantics right now. We've got a serious situation on the planet with an outbreak that's spreading, and we need to do something pretty drastically right now.
I'm going to come back to that point, but just to be clear, what again are the indicators that they will be looking at, that you fellow scientists are going to be looking at to determine